In this class, we're going to continue our study of classical arithmetic. We're going to continue studying the Introduction to Arithmetic by the ancient philosopher Nicomachus. In our first lesson, we read all through the first chapter, and there's a couple of questions that I gave you at the end of the chapter as sort of a summary of what we talked about, and I'm going to put them on the board here in a minute. But to get started, let's just get our notes ready and get our paper labeled. Make sure your name and today's date is on the top of the paper. The name of this course in the Academy is Classical Arithmetic. I think I can spell arithmetic. And we're reading a book titled, or written by, Nicomachus. In Latin, it's Nicomachus with a U. It's called Intro to Arithmetic, simple enough. But it's an ancient book. That's our text. That's the textbook for our study of classical arithmetic. In lesson 1, we had an introduction to the study, and we talked about a few important general questions or topics. First of all, we asked the question, what is wisdom? Nicomachus starts off very generally talking about wisdom, what wisdom is. Said wisdom is the knowledge of reality. Wisdom is the knowledge of reality or of real things. And so then we ask the question, what is this reality? And you may start to remember, we had this class, I think more than a week ago. He asked, what is reality? And the answer was, by reality, what he means are those things which never change. Things which never change. Eternal things, things which last forever. And just think about it. It's pretty interesting to think about because we don't think about this enough. We don't think about this day by day, but our souls will never die. Our souls are forever. We, human beings, were created to be real things by God. Animals are not real things. Individual animals that we see, they're not real things. We'll understand this more as we go on. But God created man to be a real thing, to live forever, to have eternal life. We are real things. And it's only appropriate for us to seek the knowledge of real things like us. We're real things. And that's why the ancient philosophers had a saying, know thyself. Because if you know yourself, if you know what you are, if you know that you're a creature made in the image and likeness of God, composed of body and soul, created by God to exist forever, if you really thought about what you are, if you really thought about it all the time, and you committed your life to only seek those things, be interested in those things that are truly human, things that last forever, and you made them the focus of your life, you'd be happy. And so the ancient philosophers used to say, know thyself. And what they mean by this is think about what you are. Think about what you are. That's what know thyself means. You are a real thing. You are an eternal thing that's going to exist forever. Do things worthy of such a nature. Live a life worthy of that nature. Live a life worthy of a person created to exist forever. know yourself. That's what that saying means. Wisdom is knowledge that is proper to human beings, because we are real things, things that are going to exist forever. Wisdom is the knowledge that's proper for us, the knowledge of reality. So that was the basic gist of our first lesson, to get us started with contemplation, with thinking about these eternal things. What are eternal things? What are the things that never change? That's what we started to contemplate and think about in chapter 1. So in this lesson, we're going to go on with chapter 2 in this study, and I think you'll find this a pretty easy lesson, because we talk about these things all the time. So let's go ahead and read together through chapter 2 of the Introduction to Arithmetic by Nicomachus. Chapter 2. Those things, just follow along. If you have it in front of you, that's good. Chapter 2. Those things are immaterial. That means not made of material. Those things are immaterial, eternal, without end, and it is their nature to persist forever, the same and unchanging, abiding by their own essential being, and each one of them is called real, in the proper sense, in the true sense. So let's think about these things. Those things are immaterial, eternal, without end. And I just want you to think about this. When I say that Nicomachus is interested in things that are immaterial, where do we talk about material things in our studies? Where do we talk about material things? Where do we study and talk about material things? Science, right? What is the subject of our studies in biology? It explicitly says that our study is limited to what? Material things. So just think about how different this is, right? Here in arithmetic, we're learning that in order for us to be truly human and seek wisdom, we have to learn to direct our attention to things that are not material, things that are eternal, things that are unchanging, things that are eternal. What does eternal mean? Last forever, right. The philosophers are telling us that in order to seek wisdom, you need to turn your attention away from material things to things that are immaterial. And then in modern science, the scientist comes along and tells us that we should study what? The opposite, material things. Okay? So you see, the philosopher, the ancient wise man, and the modern scientists are promoting two completely different things. The scientist is saying, come, let's go study material things. Let's make material things the only thing we study. Let's seek truth by studying material things, because material things are reality. And everybody thinks that's so clever and that's such a cute idea. And off they run into all their science classes. And you know that I've said there's nothing wrong with science by itself. But it's not what modern people think it is. It's not the way to wisdom. It's not the way to happiness. The ancient philosophers tell us exactly the opposite. They say, how are you? You're created to live forever. How are you ever going to be happy with material things, which don't last as long as you do? These things perish and they're gone forever. You are going to live forever. How can you believe that you can ever find happiness in things that are less valuable than you? The philosophers are calling us away from paying attention to material things, and they're urging us to devote our attention and to contemplate immaterial things, things that never change, things that last forever. And they're telling us that if you would turn your mind to these things, you will find wisdom and you will be happy. You'll be happy because you're a human being. You're a creature made in the image of God. You're not an animal. Food, pleasure, anything else, those things are not going to make you happy. You weren't created for those things. You were created to enjoy God forever. And until you start to seek those kinds of things, you're going to be miserable. St. Augustine had a quote. He said, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. God is the immaterial, eternal, and unchanging thing. God is the reality. Okay? So we're encouraged in arithmetic to turn our attention to things that are immaterial, things that are eternal, things that never end, things that persist, that means continue, always the same and unchanging, abiding in their own essential being, always remaining what they are. And each one of them is called real in the true and proper sense of the word. They alone can be called real things. Let's keep reading. But things that are involved in birth and destruction or decay, things that are involved in birth, things that decay or are destroyed, things that grow and diminish, all kinds of change and participation are seen to vary continually, constantly changing. And while they are called real things by people in the world, they call these the real things, things I can see and touch and taste and smell. That's what everyone, especially today, that's what people call real things. While they are called real things, with the same term as the other things are called, by the same name, so far as they partake of those real things, they are not actually real by their own nature. They are not actually real because they do not abide. They do not remain for even the shortest moment in the same condition. They do not remain for even the shortest moment in the same condition, but are always passing over into all sorts of changes. Don't you experience that with your own body? Isn't your body always changing? One day you feel good, the next day you're sick. The next day you wake up with a problem, the next day it goes away, you get excited, you think about what you want to do, and then another problem comes. You plan to do this, the weather changes, now you can't do that, so you go to do this, and now the weather gets back, and so your life is constantly dealing with changes. How can you be happy in that life? If your focus is on things and on material things that are constantly changing, how can you ever have peace? How can you ever rest? You can't. These things are always passing over in all sorts of changes. He says, to quote the words of Timaeus in Plato, just so you know, Plato was a philosopher. You've heard that name, right? Plato. Plato was a philosopher who wrote, I think, 55 books that you can still read today. They're dialogues, they're discussions. And he in the discussions, Socrates discusses all of these important topics with other men. You can read the writings of Plato. One of Plato's books is called the Timaeus, and in that book, the man Timaeus speaks about the origin of the world and the universe. So Nicomachus here says, to quote the words of Timaeus in Plato, what is that which always is? This is sort of a riddle, if you guys like riddles. What is that which always is and has no birth? And what is that which is always becoming but never is? I'll repeat that. What is that which always is and has no birth? And what is that which always is becoming but never is? Think about when Moses saw God in the desert by the burning bush, and Moses asked God, what is your name? What did God say? I am. What do you think that means? Now you see what that means? God is reality. He is that which he says basically, my name is I am, the one thing that is, the only reality. And to quote the words of Timaeus one more time, what is that which always is and has no birth? And what is that which is always becoming, always changing, but never actually is? The one, he says, is apprehended by the mental processes. That is, our minds are designed by God. Our minds were designed by God to be able to apprehend the things which never change. Our minds were created by God to allow us to think about and know those things that are immaterial, unchanging, and eternal. God made our minds capable of thinking about those things, and our happiness is in those things. By the mental processes, he says, with reasoning, and is ever the same. The other kind of things which are always becoming and never actually are, the others can be guessed at by opinions in company with unreasoning senses, a thing which becomes and passes away but never really is. If you hang out with wise men, truly wise men, they'll be thinking about and talking about eternal, unchanging things. That's what they think about. That's what they study. That's what they talk about. And Proverbs says, he who walks with wise men becomes wise. But if you hang around with people who are not wise, you'll notice that everything they talk about, everything that they think about, it's the stuff that's always changing, the stuff that can never make you happy. And every day, it's a different topic. Every day, it's a different problem. It's a different fight. It's a different issue. They lost something else. Something else got stolen. Somebody else is making them angry. Some other problem is existing. They're sick again. Their leg hurts. They got an injury. Foolish people are always talking about and thinking about the things that constantly change. And that's why they're never, ever happy. They never have any peace. And you can just listen to what someone talks about and watch them. And you can see their life is controlled by unreasoning sense. Their life is filled with opinions, what they think about all these constantly changing things. They're always emotional. They're always upset, always having problems, always changing. And they could be done with that life like that if they chose to. And if you spend time with a wise man, you'll see that his eyes are fixed on things that are eternal, that never change. You'll see that he's always doing the same things. He's always at peace. He's always seeking the same things. He's not up one day and down another day. He's perfectly content to be alone. He doesn't get upset about other things that are not in his control. And that's the life of the philosopher, a life of peace, a life of true wisdom. Our minds with reasoning, our mental processes with reasoning were created to focus on and be satisfied with things that never change. Our senses in our bodies, when our senses are disconnected from reason and they're just left to rule our lives, make us miserable. They're seeking after things that they can never control. They're always frustrated. Let's keep reading here. Therefore, if we crave for the goal that is worthy and fitting for man, if we crave the goal that is worthy and fitting for man, namely happiness, happiness of life, you're going to see that Aristotle teaches the same thing in ethics. Happiness is what we all want. Do you need a wife to be happy? Do you need money to be happy? Do you need perfect health to be happy? A beautiful house to be happy? Do you need good weather to be happy? No. That's not what makes human beings happy. The goal of the human life is happiness. But that happiness is based on how God created us. And He created us to enjoy eternal things. And we're never happy until we finally focus on eternal things. If we crave for the goal that is worthy and fitting for man, namely happiness of life, and this is accomplished by philosophy alone and nothing else. Philosophy. Philosophy is how human beings seek happiness. And what is philosophy? Do you remember what philosophy is?
Love of wisdom.
Love of wisdom. Good. The love of wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom, is what leads men to happiness. And if you don't believe that, go try something else, and you'll see. You'll learn the hard way. This happiness of life is accomplished by philosophy alone and nothing else. And philosophy, as I said, means for us the desire for wisdom. And wisdom is the science of truth in things. And of things, some are properly so called, others merely share the name. It is reasonable and most necessary to distinguish and systematize the accidental qualities of things. And we should talk about that for a minute. So, how are we doing time-wise?
20 minutes.
Okay, we're doing fine. All right, so we read here, happiness of life is what we all desire. That's what we all desire. That's the ultimate goal of life, happiness. And remember what Aristotle teaches us in ethics? Not just happiness for myself, right? Because that's actually not happy. You know? If you had everything in the world and you imagine yourself to be perfectly happy, but your friend was sick, you wouldn't be happy, right? So true happiness is the happiness of everyone. But what he says is the only way to happiness is through philosophy. And when he says philosophy, he doesn't mean what some modern college means by philosophy. He means what these ancient philosophers mean by philosophy, the love of wisdom. And wisdom is the science or knowledge of truth in things. And he says what we must learn, what we must focus on in philosophy, he says at the end of this paragraph, it is reasonable and most necessary to distinguish and to systematize the accidental qualities of things. The qualities of things. He says that's what we should actually focus on. Isn't that weird? What does that mean? What he means is we should focus on the ideas that the physical things that we see, they participate in these ideas. So, for example, if I say that, give me a person's name, Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas is, and I name an accidental quality, wise, right? Thomas Aquinas is wise. Thomas Aquinas is a man, but this quality, Thomas Aquinas comes and goes. He lived in the 1200s and he died, and we believe that he's in heaven now. He's a saint. He's canonized by the church. But Thomas Aquinas is no longer part of this life in this world, other than the fact that he may intercede for people as a saint. But he's gone. His life is over. He's dead, as far as human life is concerned. If you were his friend and he died, he was gone. And everybody in your life, either you or them is going to die. You're going to experience their death, or they're going to experience your death. And so if you have all of your happiness built in this relationship, it's going to end one day. And then what? So we can focus on people, but people come and go. And we can't be happy if we build our whole life on some person, because he can be gone like that. But if we say Thomas Aquinas is wise, what we're saying is Thomas Aquinas is good because he's wise. So instead of focusing on Thomas Aquinas, we should focus our minds on what it means to be wise. Because this idea, this quality, pay attention here, this idea never changes. This idea is eternal. We can fix our minds on the idea of what it means to be wise, and we can contemplate it and reflect on it forever. It's never going to change. You see that? If I said that, think of another saint, Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila is, and I name some quality of Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila is holy. If I fix my mind on what it means to be holy and meditate on this quality never changes. My mind can focus on that quality. My mind can contemplate the idea of what it means to be holy, and I can think about that forever. It's something that never changes. The idea of being holy or holiness. The idea of being wise. It's something that I can focus my mind on and contemplate and enjoy forever. He says, it's reasonable and necessary to distinguish and systematize the accidental qualities of things. Let's keep reading. Things, then, both those which are properly so called and those that simply have the same name, so he means real things and things that really aren't things at all. Real things, those that are properly so called, and those that simply are called things but are not reality. Some of them are unified and continuous. Some of them are unified, that means they're one thing and they're continuous. For example, an animal. An animal is a unified thing and continuous. The whole universe is such a thing. It's unified and continuous. A tree is unified and continuous. And other things which are properly and peculiarly called what? Magnitudes, right there in the book. Magnitudes. So he says there's two kinds of things, two kinds of real things. Two kinds of real things. The first kind of real things are magnitudes. And right here you see is where we move. We make a move here. We make a move here from a general discussion about philosophy. We're going along talking about philosophy, talking about wisdom, talking about reality, what's real, what's not real, what's eternal, what's temporary, what changes, what's unchangeable. We're just going along talking about philosophy, and all of a sudden, bam, what subject are we in? Mathematics. Right? So all of a sudden, Nicomachus is telling us that our happiness is pursued through the study of mathematics. There's not many people who would think that that's true, huh? But he says the first kind of things we think about are things which are unified and continuous. That is, they're magnitudes. Magnitudes are one thing. And he says others, he says, are discontinuous in a side-by-side arrangement, as it were in heaps, which are called what? Other things are discontinuous in a side-by-side arrangement, and as it were heaps, which are called multitudes. So he says, things can be divided into these two different classes, magnitudes and multitudes. Things which are one and continuous are called magnitudes. An animal, in this sense, is a magnitude. Other things are discontinuous in a side-by-side arrangement, as it were in heaps or piles, which are called multitudes. A flock, for instance, a people, a heap, a chorus, and the like. He goes on to say, wisdom then, and I want you to follow this, wisdom then must be considered to be the knowledge of these two forms. Wisdom must be considered to be the knowledge of these two forms, because these are the real things. Since, however, all multitude and magnitude are by their own nature of necessity infinite. How many different magnitudes are there in the world? For example, he said an animal is a magnitude. Can you study all the animals? They're infinite, right? Think of the things he listed. Animals, the universe. The universe is, as far as we know, infinite. You can't study, you can't meditate on the universe, right? A tree or trees. You can't study all the trees. The magnitudes, they're infinite in number. We can't study anything that's infinite in number. Likewise, all multitudes, not that every multitude is infinite, but that there are an infinity of different multitudes to study. So we can't study magnitudes and multitudes themselves. Follow me here. We're almost done. We can't study magnitudes and multitudes themselves because they're infinite in number. That can't be what we study. We can't study what's infinite. Multitude starts from a definite root and never ceases increasing. Multitude starts from a definite root and never ceases increasing. What he means by a definite root is the number 1. Multitude starts from one, the root of all multitude, and never ceases increasing. We can't study multitudes. They go forever. Numbers are infinite. We can't study the numbers themselves, or we can't study we can't study all the multitudes. They're infinite in number. Magnitude, if we take a whole and divide it, we can continue dividing it forever. It can divide and divide and divide and divide and divide, and we can go on dividing forever. So that can't be studied. Magnitude divides forever. The dividing process goes on forever, proceeds to infinity. Sciences are always sciences of limited things. We can't have a science of infinite things. A science must be a science of limited things, never of infinites. It is evident that a science dealing with magnitude per se, or by itself, or with multitude per se, could never be formulated. There's no science for these things themselves, for each of them is limitless in itself. Multitude is limitless in the direction of the more, as it increases forever. Magnitude is infinite in the direction of the less, as a body can be divided and divided and divided and divided forever. A science, therefore, must arise to deal with something that is separated from each of them. We have to study an idea that is drawn from magnitude and multitude, but we can't study magnitudes and multitudes themselves because they go on for infinity. We have to draw something from magnitude that we can study, and we have to draw something or abstract something from multitude that we can study. What can we study? What can we actually have science of, have scientific knowledge of? He tells us, for multitudes, we can study quantity. And for magnitudes, we can study what? What does he say? For magnitudes, we can study, see if you can find the answer. For multitudes, we can study quantity, and for magnitudes, we can study size. Last sentence of the chapter. A science would arise to deal with something separated from, that is abstract, something that we draw from these things which cannot be studied, something that we can actually study. From multitude, we can't study multitudes themselves, but we can study quantity. We can't study magnitudes themselves, but we can study size. And so the end of this chapter tells us that if we have to seek what it is that we can study, what it is that we can focus on and contemplate and investigate, what we can know that will give us wisdom so that we can be happy through philosophy. And what he says is, all things can be divided into two classes, magnitudes and multitudes, but we can't study magnitudes and multitudes themselves because they're infinite. But what we can do is we can abstract from multitude the concept of quantity or number. And we can abstract from magnitude the concept of size. And these things are not infinite, and we can contemplate these. So these must be the subject of our sciences, or the subject of our philosophical studies. We must study size and quantity. All right? Size and quantity. And that's the end of chapter 2. So what we've done in chapter 2, listen as I quickly review this. In chapter 2, Nicomachus has continued his study that he introduced in chapter 1, talking about wisdom. What is wisdom? What is science? What is reality? And in chapter 2, he went further to say, how can man, who was created with this eternal spirit within him, with these mental powers and this faculty of reason, how can he ever be satisfied in material things that are constantly changing? Those can't be the subject of our studies. Man has to focus his mind on things which are unchanging, things which are eternal, things which are immaterial. And when we consider what those things are, he says they are qualities that exist, qualities that can be abstracted from the things in the world around us. And these are the subject of philosophy. This is what we study. And I know that that's difficult to understand as we're just getting introduced to these ideas. But the important thing that you have to realize is that as we study the mathematical sciences, and this discussion is going to continue in chapter 3, as we get into the mathematical studies, if we study them the right way, we'll have this philosophical knowledge that Nicomachus tells us can bring us happiness. And I'll try to help you to understand that and see that as we go along, okay? In modern math classes, what do people study math for? Why do people study math in modern classes, modern math classes, modern schools? Why do they study math?
Transcript.
To get a transcript for college, right? What else? What else do they study math? They say it's useful for, what's it useful for? Get a job. Useful to manage your money.
And work his cause.
Right, to work, whatever, any kind of craft or work. Are those the things that man was created for? Is that the end of man? No, that's not what math is for. And so as we study math, following the advice and the direction of these ancient wise men, we're going to focus on different things in mathematical studies. And that's the difference between classical mathematics, focused on unchanging and eternal things for the sake of wisdom and happiness, and modern math, which is for slaves. It's for people worried about money and jobs and material stuff. That's not a proper study for human beings. So that's all for lesson 2, chapter 2 of the Introduction to Arithmetic by Nicomachus. Okay?